I watched my stepmother's face turn purple with rage, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I smiled. What do you mean, no? She hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the armrest of the hospital waiting room chair. Sophia needs that heart, Lynn. You'll give her your spot on the transplant list. Today. My father stood behind her like he always did, spineless, silent, useless. My stepsister Sophia sat in her wheelchair, tears already streaming down her face in that practiced way that had manipulated our family for 23 years. In my first life, those tears had destroyed me. Not this time. I said no. I kept my voice steady, calm. My heart monitor beeped its irregular rhythm, the sound that had been the soundtrack to my slow death. I'm not giving up my transplant spot. Sophia's sobs grew louder. But I'm dying, Lynn. How can you be so selfish? The irony would have been funny if it hadn't killed me the first time around. You have dilated cardiomyopathy, I said flatly, watching her performance. Serious, yes. But your ejection fraction is still at 30%. Mine is 15. I've been on this list for 2 years. You've been sick for 2 months. Family takes care of family. My stepmother shot up from her chair. Your father took Sophia and me in when we had nothing. You owe us everything. Everything. They wanted everything. In my first life, they'd gotten it. I could still remember the exact moment my heart had given out. 3 months after I'd signed the paperwork transferring my transplant spot to Sophia. I'd been alone in a charity ward, my insurance having mysteriously lapsed, my father's phone going straight to voicemail. The last thing I'd seen was the water-stained ceiling tile above my bed. The last thing I'd heard was the flat line of my own heart monitor. Then I'd woken up. 6 months earlier, in my old apartment, with my failing heart and a second chance. I don't owe you anything, I said now, and the words tasted like freedom, especially not my life. My father finally spoke. Lynn, please, be reasonable. Sophia has her whole future ahead of her. And I don't? The laugh that escaped me was sharp enough to cut. I'm 25, Dad. 25. I had a future too, until you all decided hers was worth more. Don't be dramatic, my stepmother snapped. You'll get another heart. You're young. You're strong. I was dying. Past tense. Because in 6 hours, I wouldn't be. My MELD score is critical. Every day I don't get a transplant, my other organs start failing. But you knew that, didn't you? You just didn't care. Sophia's crying had stopped. She was staring at me with something ugly in her eyes, the real her, the one she hid behind designer clothes and practiced fragility. You've changed. Yes, I agreed, I have. Because I'd died. I'd felt every cell in my body shut down. I'd experienced the cold terror of knowing I'd sacrificed myself for people who'd probably forget my name by my funeral. And then I'd been given a gift. I'd come back. The first thing I'd done was cry for 3 hours. The second thing I'd done was make a list. The third thing I'd done was make a phone call to a number I'd memorized in my first life, but never had the chance to use. A number from a business card that had fallen out of a patient's wallet during my volunteer shift at the hospital. Richard Chen, billionaire, philanthropist. And according to the news report I'd read the day before my death, someone who died 6 months after me from the same heart condition, still waiting for a donor. In my first life, I'd returned his wallet and refused his offer of a reward. I'd been proud, stupid, convinced that good things came to good people who worked hard and sacrificed. In this life, I'd called him from the hospital parking lot. Mr. Chen, I'd said when his assistant put me through, you don't know me, but my name is Lin Zhao. I'm the woman who returned your wallet last week. I need to speak with you about a matter of life and death, both yours and mine. I'd told him everything. Not about the rebirth, I wasn't that crazy, but about the heart condition we shared, about the broken transplant system, about the private donor networks that existed for people with enough money and desperation. And what do you want from me? He'd asked, his voice sharp with the intelligence that had built his empire. I want to save both our lives, I'd said. I'm a universal donor match with an O-negative blood type. You have the resources to find us both private donors. We work together, or we both die waiting for a system that's designed to let people like us fall through the cracks. There'd been a long pause, then, come to my office tomorrow. Bring your medical records. That had been 4 months ago. Since then, I'd watched my family's behavior like a scientist observing lab rats. Every interaction had been exactly the same as my first life. My stepmother's casual cruelty, wrapped in concern. My father's willful blindness. Sophia's calculated fragility, deployed like a weapon whenever she wanted something. The only difference was me. I'd stopped trying to please them, stopped hoping they'd love me, stopped participating in my own destruction. And I'd waited for this moment. "You can't do this," Sophia said, her voice dropping the tremor. "I need that transplant. You have to give it to me." "I don't have to do anything." I stood up, my legs shaky but stable. The energy medicine Richard's doctors had prescribed was doing its job, buying me time. And even if I wanted to give you my spot, which I don't, it wouldn't matter. My stepmother's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" This was it, the moment I'd been living for. "I'm having my transplant surgery tomorrow morning," I said, letting each word land like a hammer. "Private donor, already matched and confirmed. The surgical team is prepping now." The silence that followed was beautiful. My father found his voice first. That's not possible. Those arrangements take months, cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. You don't have that kind of money." "No," I agreed, "but my donor's family does, and they specifically requested me." It was true in a way. Richard had found us both donors through his network, a network I could never have accessed without him. 2 terminal patients in a car accident, both matches, both whose families had agreed to directed donation. Richard was getting his transplant next week. I was getting mine tomorrow. We were both going to live. "This is insane," my stepmother sputtered. "You can't just... You have to tell them you don't want it. Tell them to give it to Sophia instead." I picked up my bag, my hand steady despite my racing heart. "Sophia can wait like everyone else. Maybe it'll teach her some humility." "You selfish bitch." Sophia was on her feet now, wheelchair forgotten, face red with rage. "I'm your sister. How can you..." "You're not my sister." The words came out colder than I'd intended, but I meant everyone. "You're the daughter of the woman my father married when I was 12. You've spent 13 years making my life hell, and I've spent 13 years pretending not to notice because I wanted a family." I looked at my father. He couldn't meet my eyes. "But here's what I learned, Dad. They were never my family. You chose them over me every single day. When Sophia borrowed my college fund and never paid it back. When my stepmother accidentally threw out my mother's jewelry. When they moved into Mom's house and erased every trace of her like she never existed." "Lynn," he started, but I held up my hand. "I'm done. After my surgery, I don't want to see any of you again. Don't call, don't visit. Don't send cards or flowers or try to guilt trip me into forgiving you. You're dead to me. Which is ironic since I was almost dead because of you." I walked toward the exit, my heart hammering against my ribs, my vision starting to blur at the edges. I needed to sit down soon, needed my medication, needed to rest before tomorrow's surgery. But first, I needed to do this. "Wait!" My stepmother grabbed my arm, her grip bruising. "You can't just walk away. After everything we've done for you..." "You mean after everything I've done for you?" I yanked my arm free. "I paid rent in a house my mother owned. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through college while Sophia partied on my college fund. I took care of you when you had your nervous breakdown that was really just you guilt-tripping Dad into buying you a new car." "How dare you? How dare I?" My laugh was harsh. "You were planning to let me die. Don't pretend otherwise. I saw the messages." That stopped her cold. In my first life, I'd found the texts after I'd already signed the paperwork. Messages between my stepmother and Sophia, laughing about how easy it had been to manipulate me. Discussing how much my father would inherit when I died, the life insurance policy my mother had left me, the trust fund that would revert to him if I died without children. They'd been planning it for months. In this life, I'd hacked Sophia's cloud storage the day I woke up. I had screenshots of everything, stored in 3 separate locations, ready to send to the police if they tried anything. "I don't know what you're talking about," my stepmother said, but her face had gone white. "Yes, you do." I pulled out my phone, pulled up a screenshot. "Want me to read them out loud? The stupid bitch actually thinks we care about her. Another few weeks of crying and she'll hand over the transplant spot like a good little doormat." Sophia made a strangled sound. Or how about this one? Once she's dead, we can finally sell that dump of a house and move somewhere decent. And her dad's too weak to stop us. My father's face had crumbled. You said, oh, grow up, my stepmother snapped at him. You knew what this was. You've always known. The mask was off now. Good. I kept these screenshots as insurance. I told them. If anything happens to me, anything suspicious, anything convenient, they go to the police. I've also written a full account of your coercion and left it with my lawyer. Try to contest my will, try to claim I was mentally incompetent, try anything, and I'll bury you. I looked at Sophia, who was shaking with rage. And you don't really need a heart transplant, do you? Her face went slack with shock. I pulled your medical records, I continued, called in a favor with a friend in cardiology. Your ejection fraction isn't 30%. It's 45. You're not even sick enough to be on the transplant list. Your mother bribed a doctor to falsify your test results. That's not... Sophia couldn't even finish the sentence. Medical fraud, transplant fraud, both federal crimes. I smiled at my stepmother. You thought you could play the system. Thought you could take my spot, get Sophia a new heart she doesn't even need, and then... what? Sell it? Keep her dependent on anti-rejection drugs she doesn't need so you can control her inheritance? I'd figured it out 3 weeks into my second life, when I'd actually bothered to look at Sophia's paperwork with a clear head. The numbers didn't add up. The symptoms didn't match. The whole thing was a performance, and I'd fallen for it because I'd wanted so desperately to believe my family loved me. You can't prove any of this, my stepmother hissed. I already did. I sent everything to the hospital ethics board this morning. They're launching a full investigation into Dr. Morrison, your bribed cardiologist. He's probably being interviewed right now. Right on cue, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the text from Richard's head of security. Morrison just lost his medical license. Hospital is filing criminal charges. Oh, I said, showing them the message. Looks like I can prove it. Sophia let out a wail that could have shattered glass. My stepmother looked like she wanted to claw my eyes out. My father just stood there, finally understanding what his weakness had cost him. Goodbye, I said simply. I hope Sophia enjoys the consequences of her actions. And I hope you enjoy knowing that the daughter you threw away was worth 10 of the one you chose. I walked out of that hospital with my head high and my heart failing, but for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt free. The surgery took 14 hours. I woke up to the sound of a new heartbeat. Strong, steady mine. Richard had visited while I was in recovery, his own surgery scheduled for 5 days out. We'd become something like friends over the past months, bonded by our shared mortality and our shared determination to survive it. How do you feel? He asked, looking almost as exhausted as I felt. Like I just got a second chance, I said. And then, because the morphine made me honest, a third chance, technically. He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask. Smart man. My medical team was excellent. Richard had hired the best surgical team in the country, and they'd treated me like I was a princess instead of a charity case using someone else's money. I'd insisted on paying him back, had already worked out a 10-year payment plan that he'd pretended to agree to while secretly planning to forgive. We'd argued about it. I'd win eventually. I always won arguments with Richard. I'd learned how in my first life, watching him on business news while I rotted in that charity ward. Your father tried to visit, my nurse mentioned on day 3 post-op. We told him you weren't accepting visitors like you instructed. Good. I didn't feel guilty. I felt relief. The hospital ethics investigation had exploded into a full-blown scandal. Dr. Morrison had been accepting bribes for years, falsifying records, bumping patients up and down the transplant list based on payment rather than medical need. My stepmother and Sophia were facing federal charges. My father had lawyered up and was trying to claim he'd known nothing. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe he'd really been that blind, that weak, that willfully ignorant. It didn't matter. I was done making excuses for him. On day 7, Richard had his surgery. I visited him in recovery, brought him terrible hospital jello, and told him about the job offer I'd received, a position at his company's charitable foundation, managing their medical assistance program. You'd be good at it, he said, his voice rough from the breathing tube. You know what it's like to need help and not get it. I know what it's like to be sacrificed, I corrected. I won't let that happen to anyone else. Not on my watch. He smiled, and I could see the color already returning to his face. We were both going to make it. We were both going to live. The universe had given us both a second chance, and we weren't going to waste it. 6 months post-transplant, I moved into a new apartment across the city. I'd sold my mother's house, my house, for 3 times what it was worth, thanks to the real estate boom. My father had tried to contest it, claiming he had rights as my only living parent. My lawyer had buried him in paperwork. I used the money to fund my first independent project, a nonprofit that helped low-income patients navigate the transplant system. We provided legal advocacy, medical navigation, and financial assistance. We exposed corruption and bribed doctors. We saved lives. I named it after my mother. Richard served on the board. His donation had been the startup capital, but my work was what made it grow. Within a year, we'd helped 50 patients. Within 2 years, 200. Within 3, we'd expanded to 5 cities, and I was good at this. Better than I'd ever been at trying to please people who'd never loved me. Sometimes I saw my father's name in the news. He'd divorced my stepmother after the criminal charges, trying to save his own skin. It hadn't worked. He'd lost his job, his reputation, his comfortable life. I felt nothing when I read about it. No satisfaction, no grief. Just a distant recognition that this was the man who'd let me die. Sophia had avoided jail time by testifying against my stepmother and Dr. Morrison. She'd been sentenced to community service and probation. Her social media had gone quiet, her friends had vanished. She'd gotten a job as a receptionist somewhere, was apparently trying to rebuild her life. I hoped she succeeded. Not for her sake, for the sake of whoever she'd become, if she actually learned something from all this. My stepmother was serving 8 years for fraud and conspiracy. I'd sent flowers to the trial, white lilies, the same kind I would have had at my funeral. The note had said, "For the death of Lin Zhao, who you tried to bury, she's doing much better now." Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying. More than I could possibly express. Year 4 post-transplant, I met someone. His name was James, and he was a transplant surgeon who'd heard about my foundation's work. He'd started volunteering, helping us review cases, and identify patients who were being failed by the system. "You're making a real difference," he told me one night, after we'd successfully gotten a 14-year-old girl bumped up the transplant list ahead of a wealthy businessman who'd been bribing administrators. "The world needs more people like you." "The world needs fewer people like my stepmother," I countered, but I smiled when I said it. He knew my story. Everyone in the transplant community did. The scandal had been huge, the implications enormous. Reforms had been implemented, oversight had been increased, lives had been saved. I'd turned my death into something meaningful. "Your heart sounds good," he said, because he was a surgeon and that was his version of flirting. "It should," I replied. "It cost enough." We both laughed, and I felt the strong, steady beat in my chest, the heart that should have been Sophia's in another life. The heart that was mine now, carrying me forward into a future I'd had to die to earn. James kissed me that night, gentle and careful, like I might break. "I'm tougher than I look," I told him. "I know," he said. "You've died and come back. That makes you basically immortal." If only he knew, year 5 post-transplant, Richard died. Not from his heart, that was strong, beating steady thanks to the same donor network that had saved us both. He died in a plane crash, sudden and senseless, the kind of random tragedy that proves the universe doesn't care about fairness. I gave the eulogy at his funeral. "Richard Chen saved my life," I told the crowd of business titans and politicians and society names. Not just with his money, though that helped. He saved my life by seeing me when I was invisible, by believing me when I told him the system was broken, by fighting with me to fix it. I looked out at the audience, saw the faces of the people we'd helped, the lives we'd changed. He used to say that money was meaningless unless you spent it on things that mattered. People mattered, second chances mattered, justice mattered. My voice broke, and I let it. This was real grief for a real friend, for someone who'd earned my tears. Richard gave me a second chance at life. I'm going to spend the rest of it making sure other people get the same gift. That's how we honor him. That's how we make his death mean something. The foundation exploded after that. Richard had left us $70 million in his will with instructions to let Lynn do whatever the hell she thinks is right. I did. Year 10 post-transplant, I got married. James proposed on the anniversary of my transplant surgery, which was either incredibly romantic or incredibly morbid, depending on your perspective. I said yes either way. My father wasn't invited to the wedding, neither was Sophia. I'd seen her once 3 years earlier at a coffee shop. She'd looked tired, older, ordinary. She'd opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it and walked away. I'd let her. Some people didn't deserve confrontation. They deserved to be forgotten. The wedding was small, just friends, colleagues, people who'd earned their place in my life. Richard's widow was there, elegant and dry-eyed, telling embarrassing stories about her late husband. The first patient our foundation had saved was there, now a healthy college graduate studying medicine. I wore my mother's pearls, the ones my stepmother had thrown out, but that I'd actually found in Sophia's jewelry box during my first life. In this life, I'd stolen them back a week after my rebirth. To second chances, James said in his vows, his hand over my heart, feeling the steady beat. To choosing ourselves, I replied, my hand over his. We danced until midnight, surrounded by people who loved us, and I thought about the girl I'd been in my first life. Desperate, people-pleasing, willing to die for scraps of affection. She'd deserved better. This life was what she should have had all along. Year 15 post-transplant, Sophia showed up at my office. My secretary tried to stop her, but I waved her through. I was curious. 15 years was a long time to hold a grudge, and I'd honestly thought I'd never see her again. She looked different. Older, obviously, but also smaller. Not physically. She'd gained weight, looked healthier than she ever had. But her presence had diminished. The predatory sharpness was gone. I'm not here to ask for money, she said, standing in the doorway like she was afraid to come further. Or forgiveness. I don't deserve either. No, I agreed. You don't. She flinched but didn't leave. I wanted you to know that I'm glad you survived, that you didn't give me your transplant spot. I would have wasted it. I studied her, looking for the lie. I'd gotten good at seeing through people, at spotting manipulation a mile away. All I saw was exhaustion. Why are you here, Sophia? Because I've spent 15 years in therapy trying to figure out why I did what I did, she said quietly. And I finally understand. I was jealous. Of you. Of how much your mom loved you. Of how smart you were. How kind. My mom taught me that life was about taking what you could get, and you were an easy target. So this is your amends step? I kept my voice flat. Very 12-step of you. No. She shook her head. I'm not asking for absolution. I saw what you built, the foundation, the lives you've saved. I saw you on the news, accepting that humanitarian award. She pulled an envelope from her purse, set it on my desk. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure it never happens to anyone else. That's a check for $50,000. It's everything I have. I want you to use it to help people like who I pretended to be, kids who really are sick, who really do need transplants. I didn't touch the envelope. I don't want your money. I know. Sophia's smile was bitter. But the kids who need transplants do. This isn't about you forgiving me, Lynn. It's about me trying to be less of a monster than my mother raised me to be. She turned to leave and then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know it doesn't matter. I know it doesn't change anything. But I'm sorry anyway. She left. I sat there for a long time, staring at the envelope. Eventually, I opened it. The check was real. $50,000 signed over to the foundation. I deposited it. Used it to fund transplants for 3 kids who would have died otherwise. I never spoke to Sophia again. Didn't send a thank you note, didn't acknowledge the donation publicly. She'd wanted to do one good thing with her life. I let her. But I didn't owe her forgiveness, and I didn't owe her friendship. Some wounds don't heal. They just scar over, and you learn to live with them. Year 20 post-transplant, I stood in front of Congress. Our foundation had grown into a national movement. We'd helped thousands of patients, exposed dozens of corrupt doctors, pushed through legislation that reformed the entire transplant system. The bill I was testifying for would make bribery and transplant allocation a federal crime with mandatory minimum sentences. My stepmother would have gotten 20 years instead of 8. My name is Lin Zhao, I said into the microphone, looking at the senators and representatives who held the power to change everything. 20 years ago, my family tried to coerce me into giving up my spot on the heart transplant list. I was dying. I had weeks to live. They didn't care. I'd told this story 100 times, but it never got easier. I survived because I got lucky, because I met someone who had the resources to help me access a private donor. But 90% of patients aren't that lucky. They die waiting because wealthy people cut the line. They die waiting because corrupt doctors take bribes. They die waiting because the system treats healthcare like a commodity instead of a human right. I held up a photo, one of our foundation kids, a 6-year-old who died 3 months ago waiting for a liver. Emma Martinez should be alive today. She was number 1 on the transplant list. Then, a pharmaceutical CEO's son needed a liver. His family paid off the transplant coordinator. Emma got bumped down. She died 4 days before a donor became available. The room was silent. This bill won't bring Emma back, but it will make sure the next Emma has a fair shot. It will make sure that need, not greed, determines who lives and who dies. I looked directly at Senator Morrison, Dr. Morrison's brother, who'd been fighting against the bill. Some of you will vote against this because you've received campaign donations from people who profit from the current system. Some of you will vote against it because you think healthcare should be a free market. Some of you will vote against it because you simply don't care whether poor people live or die. Senator Morrison's face turned red. But I want you to remember Emma, and I want you to remember that someday, someone you love might need a transplant. Your daughter, your wife, your grandson. And when that day comes, you'll want the system to be fair. You'll want them to be judged on medical need, not bank account balance. I stepped back from the microphone. Pass this bill. Save lives. It's that simple. The bill passed 3 months later, 68 to 32. I watched the vote from the gallery, James's hand in mine, and cried. Emma Martinez's mother was there too. We hugged, both of us sobbing, both of us knowing it was too late for Emma, but not too late for the next kid. She'd be proud of you, Emma's mother whispered. I'm sorry I couldn't save her, I whispered back. You're saving others. That's what matters. Year 25 post-transplant, my father died. I found out from a lawyer's letter. He'd left me everything in his will, not that there was much to leave. A small life insurance policy, some personal effects, a storage unit full of my mother's things that he'd apparently kept all these years. I almost threw the letter away, but James convinced me to at least look at the storage unit. You might want some of your mother's things, he said gently, for the kids. We had 2 kids by then, a daughter, 8, and a son, 5. They knew the story of how I'd survived in age-appropriate versions. They knew about their grandmother who died when I was young. They knew I'd been sick and gotten better. Someday I'd tell them the rest, but not yet. The storage unit was in a facility on the edge of town, dusty and neglected. I opened the door expecting junk. Instead, I found my childhood. Boxes of photos, my mother's wedding dress, her favorite books, my old toys, the furniture from my childhood bedroom, everything my stepmother had thrown out. He'd kept it all. At the bottom of one box, I found letters, dozens of them addressed to me, never sent. I opened one at random. Dear Lynn, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I failed you in every way a father can fail a daughter. I was weak, and my weakness nearly killed you. I've followed your career. I've read every article about your foundation, watched every interview. I've seen the lives you've saved, the good you've done with the second chance you fought so hard to get. I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be. But I am. I've been sober for 10 years now. I've been in therapy for 12. I understand now what I couldn't see then, that I chose comfort over courage, that I let my fear of being alone cost you everything. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to know that I see what I did. I understand what I destroyed. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Love, Dad. The letter was dated 15 years ago. I opened another. Then another. 25 years of letters. 25 years of apologies. 25 years of him watching my life from a distance, respecting my boundaries, never trying to force his way back in. 25 years of him being the father he should have been, even though it was too late. I cried in that storage unit for an hour. James held me, and our kids played with my old toys. And I grieved for the relationship we could have had if he'd been braver. If he'd chosen me. But he hadn't. And all the letters in the world couldn't change that. I took the photos, the wedding dress, my mother's books. I left the letters. Some apologies don't deserve acceptance. They just deserve acknowledgement. He'd known what he'd done, he'd owned it. That was more than my stepmother had ever managed. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was closure. Year 30 post-transplant, I published my memoir. The Second Heart became a bestseller within weeks. People connected with the story, the betrayal, the survival, the transformation. I'd changed some details, combined some characters, but the core was true. A girl who'd almost died, a system that had failed her, a second chance that she'd seized with both hands. The book tour was exhausting and exhilarating. I spoke to packed auditoriums, signed thousands of books, heard hundreds of stories from people who'd survived their own betrayals. "You gave me hope," a woman told me in Chicago, tears streaming down her face. "My daughter needs a kidney, and my ex-husband is trying to force me to give her mine, even though I'm not a match. Reading your book made me realize I don't have to sacrifice myself." "You don't," I told her, and I gave her my lawyer's number. An older man approached me in Seattle. "I gave my liver to my brother 30 years ago. He's fine. I've had complications ever since, and he's never even called to check on me. I thought I was supposed to be grateful I could help him." "You gave him a gift," I said. "He should have been grateful. You don't owe him anything else." A teenager in New York. "My mom wants me to give her my kidney, but I'm scared. Is that selfish?" "No," I said firmly. "Your body belongs to you. Donation should be a choice, not a coercion. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting yourself." Every city, every event, every conversation reinforced what I'd learned. There were thousands of people out there being sacrificed on the altar of family obligation. Being told that love meant self-destruction, my book gave them permission to say no. The foundation's donation numbers tripled. We expanded to 15 cities. We hired 50 full-time staff members. We saved thousands of lives, but more than that, we saved thousands of people from making my first life mistake, from dying for people who didn't deserve them. Year 35 post-transplant, I went back to that hospital. The charity ward where I'd died in my first life was gone, torn down and rebuilt as a state-of-the-art cardiac center. There was a plaque in the lobby with Richard Chen's name on it, acknowledging his donation. I stood in what had been my room, looking at the space where my bed had been. "I survived," I whispered to the ghost of who I'd been. "We survived." A nurse poked her head in. "Can I help you?" "Just visiting," I said. "I used to be a patient here." "Oh yeah?" she smiled. "Cardiac?" "Heart transplant, 35 years ago." Her eyes widened. "Wow, that's amazing. Most heart transplant patients from back then. I mean, the survival rates weren't great." "I got lucky," I said. "And stubborn." She laughed. "That'll do it." I left the hospital feeling lighter than I had in years. I'd carried the weight of my first death for so long, letting it fuel my anger, my drive, my determination to never be a victim again. But standing in that room, I'd realized something. I wasn't a victim anymore. I hadn't been for a long time. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who'd been given a second chance and had used it to build something beautiful. The girl who died in that room would be proud. Year 40 post-transplant, I retired from the foundation, not from the work. I'd never stop advocating, stop fighting, stop saving lives, but from the day-to-day management, the board meetings, the endless fundraising calls. I handed the reins to my daughter, who'd grown into a fierce advocate in her own right. She'd gone to medical school, specialized in transplant surgery, and had spent the last decade working alongside James to save lives. "Are you sure?" she asked me when I told her. "The foundation is your legacy." "No," I corrected, "you're my legacy. The foundation is just what I built. You're who I raised. There's a difference." She hugged me, and I felt her strong heartbeat against my chest. The heartbeat she'd inherited from me, from my mother, from generations of women who'd refused to give up. My son had gone a different route. He was a lawyer now, specializing in medical ethics and patient advocacy. He'd won landmark cases against corrupt transplant programs, had sent a dozen Dr. Morrisons to prison. Both my kids knew the full story now. I'd told them on their 18th birthdays, separately, privately. My daughter had cried. "You died?" "I got better," I'd said, and we'd laughed through our tears. My son had been quiet for a long time. Then, "Do you ever regret it, coming back?" "Never," I'd said, "not even once." And it was true. This life, messy and complicated and sometimes painful, was infinitely better than the alternative. Year 45 post-transplant, I got a letter. It was from a prison in upstate New York, forwarded through my publisher since I'd moved several times since the memoir. The return address said, "From Margaret Zhao, my stepmother." I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. "Lynn, I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, inoperable. I have maybe 6 months left. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to make amends. I'm writing because I want you to know the truth before I die. I never loved you. I tried to. You were a sweet kid, and you deserved better. But I couldn't. You reminded me too much of your mother, of everything I wasn't. Beautiful, kind, beloved. Your father worshipped her, even after she died. He married me, but he never loved me. Not the way he loved her. I took it out on you. Made you pay for the love I couldn't have. Turned Sophia against you because if I couldn't have a daughter my husband adored, then you wouldn't either. It was cruel and petty and unforgivable. I know that now. I've had a lot of time to think in here, and I understand that I destroyed my own life trying to destroy yours. The irony is that you won. You survived. You thrived. You built an empire on the ashes of what I tried to do to you. I'm glad. I'm glad you didn't die. I'm glad you didn't give Sophia your transplant spot. I'm glad you exposed us, destroyed us, made us face the consequences of our actions. Because you were right. Sophia didn't need a transplant. She needed therapy and boundaries and a mother who actually loved her instead of using her as a weapon. I failed her worse than I failed you. At least you got away. Sophia's still trying to rebuild from the ruins of the person I made her. I don't expect you to respond to this letter. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I see what you did with your life, and it's remarkable. Your mother would be proud. Margaret. I read the letter 3 times, and then I burned it. Some truths don't deserve to be preserved. Some confessions don't deserve to be honored. She'd spent my entire life hurting me, and she wanted credit for finally admitting it? For being glad I'd survived her attempt to kill me? And no, she didn't get my tears, she didn't get my forgiveness, she didn't even get my anger anymore. She just got silence. 6 months later, I got a notification that she'd died in prison. No funeral arrangements, no next of kin to contact. I felt nothing. That was the real victory. Not that I'd survived, but that I'd moved so far past her cruelty that her death barely registered. Year 50 post-transplant, I held my first grandchild. My daughter had named her Sarah after my mother. She was perfect, tiny and pink and screaming with the fury of someone brand new to the world. "She's got your lungs," James joked, and I laughed. "And your grandfather's stubborn streak," my daughter added, kissing the baby's forehead. I held Sarah and felt the weight of everything I'd survived, everything I'd built, everything I'd become. This baby existed because I'd refused to die. Because I'd said no to people who wanted to sacrifice me. Because I'd fought for my right to live. "Welcome to the world, Sarah," I whispered. "It's a mess, but it's yours if you want it. Fight for it. Never let anyone tell you you're not worth fighting for." She grabbed my finger with her tiny hand, and I felt my heart, my strong, steady, earned heart, beat faster with joy. 50 years. Half a century since I'd died and come back. Half a century since I'd chosen myself over the people who wanted to destroy me. It had been worth it. Every hard choice, every burned bridge, every moment of standing alone, and it had all been worth it. I'm 75 years old now, and my transplanted heart is still going strong. I've outlived the doctor's predictions by decades. I've outlived my stepmother, my father, most of the people who tried to break me. I've built a foundation that saved thousands of lives. I've written 3 books. I've raised 2 incredible children and am currently spoiling 4 grandchildren. I've had a life worth living. Sometimes people ask me if I regret cutting off my family. If I ever wonder what would have happened if I'd tried to reconcile with my father, if I'd given Sophia another chance, I tell them the truth. No, some relationships are toxic. Some people will drain you dry if you let them. And choosing yourself, choosing your own life, your own happiness, your own survival is not selfish. It's necessary. I gave them one lifetime. They wasted it. I wasn't going to give them another. The heart beating in my chest is a gift. Not from them, not despite them, but in spite of them. Every beat is a victory. Every breath is a choice. I chose to live, and I chose myself. And I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. This is my second life, my second heart, my second chance, and it's mine.